Namaskar and welcome to the 15th edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival, but protected by Dettol Banega Swasth India. We are delighted to introduce our next session to this extremely packed audience, the essential Shashi Tharoor. This session, as you saw, is presented by Oneindia. Writer, diplomat, and I'll crack this joke again, which I did yesterday and Mr. Tharoor didn't listen. I hope he's proud of both my pronunciation and enunciation. Is a wildly popular and prolific wordsmith who has written over 20 books. The recent Pride, Prejudice, and Punditry is a collection of essays and pieces that range from political to personal. In conversation with author and journalist Vir Sanghvi, Tharoor discusses his ideas, insights, convictions, and everything under the sun. Shashi Tharoor is a third-term member of parliament from Thiruvananthapuram, is the best-selling author of 23 books, both fiction and non-fiction, besides being a former Under-Secretary General of the UN and a former Minister of State for Human Resource Development and for External Affairs for the Government of India. He has won numerous awards, including the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman, a Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and the Crossword Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2019, he was also awarded the Sahitya Academy Award in the category of English non-fiction for the book An Era of Darkness. Vir Sanghvi, our moderator today, is one of the best-known Indian journalists who became the youngest editor in the history of Indian journalism. From 1999 to 2004, he was editor of the Hindustan Times before being promoted to the editorial director, after which he continued at the paper as a columnist and advisor post-2007. His television career includes several award-winning shows on the Star TV network, NDTV, and CNN TV 18. Ladies and gentlemen, the essential Shashi Tharoor in conversation with Vir Sanghvi. Please welcome them with a large, huge round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, afternoon, good evening. I've done many sessions with Shashi Tharoor before, and I always tell him that doing a session with him is not like doing a session with a writer, an intellectual, or a politician. Judging by the audience response, it's like doing a session with Shah Rukh Khan or Amitabh Bachchan.
No, but thank you all for coming. It's great to see so many of you here, and very affirming. Good for my morale, which has taken a beating of late.
Hardly. Yeah, and what intrigues me about Shashi's audience, it's all of you, is it's always lots and lots of young people. So people who say that the Congress is losing young people, that politics is not interesting the young, I always say, look at Shashi Tharoor.
Thank you, Vir, and thank you all the young people and the not so young people for being here.
Yeah, the danger with sort of doing a session with Amitabh Bachchan is that you're sort of the Asrani or the cartoon of the show. So,
and I can't make you a crorepati.
So I'll try my best to get the best of Shashi, which is always spectacular. We're here to talk about the essential Shashi Tharoor, which is a collection of Shashi's writings over the years, some of them quite early, some of them quite recent, which includes pieces on cricket, pieces of fiction, personal memories, political columns, a sort of range which actually tells you, apart from anything else, what a range this man has. So Shashi, let's start with the fact that you were published for the first time in your life at the age of 11 in the Junior Statesman.
Yeah, it was a couple of weeks before my 11th birthday, actually.
Wow.
So it was fun to...
I remember reading that, actually. It was like a Biggles type story.
That's right.
Yeah.
I invented, because, at that age, what you write is bit of what you read.
Sure.
So I first wrote a bunch of short stories called Solvers on the Trail, which was about, I thought they were novels actually, but they were short stories, which were like, the Enid Blyton Five Findouters and Secret Seven and so on, except these were Indian kids and they were going off to a Kerala village and solving mysteries. I used to go off to a Kerala village with my parents every year. Didn't get to solve many mysteries, but that no one wanted to publish. And I used to love the Biggles books, all these World War adventures and so on. So I invented an Anglo-Indian fighter pilot called Bellows.
Yes, I remember that.
And he went off and won the war single-handedly, more or less, for the Allies. But anyway, and that was serialized over 6 installments in what was then called the Junior Statesman.
Which I read, and I had no idea that the guy who wrote this was 11 years old, except that JS used to have a section called Genius or Fabular Under 20, in which they used to have all these young teenagers who they said were the future of India. And there was a picture of this child, and it says Shashi Tharoor is much under 20, he's only 11, which is what I remember.
Wow, yeah. Great memory.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about Shashi Tharoor, the man. I mean, if you've read the book, and I'm assuming that those of you who haven't read it will buy a copy and get Shashi to sign it after this session. Many things come through. One of them is that you started out as a writer and you've never stopped writing. Is that fair?
That's fair to say, because, the thing is that I wrote almost compulsively. I was an asthmatic child in an India or a Bombay in those days, without television, no one had mobile phones or Nintendo or desktop computers. So all I had was books, and I ran out of books pretty quickly because I was the eldest child of the family. Books I borrowed from the library, I'd finish in the car on the way home. It was kind of a challenge. And there's only so much book cricket you could play before even that began to wear off. So I ended up writing as much to divert myself as to sort of survive, because you're sitting there gasping for breath with asthma attacks, unable to sleep, unable to even lie flat. This is as good a way of spending your time as any. So I read, and then I wrote more or less along the ways in which I used to read. And from that, I think, came the writing, because my father was generous enough to encourage this. Instead of dismissing these crawlings as pointless, he got a secretary to type them up, so suddenly they could be shared with friends and circulated and passed around. And people were kind of encouraging. In fact, my first story was published even earlier than the Junior Statesman ones. Was a short story. The Free Press Journal in Bombay in those days had a Sunday paper called the Bharat Jyoti. Yes. And they used to carry short stories. And I wrote a short story, again, probably inspired by Stephen Crane or whatever, of the American Civil War. And totally cliched. And it was this father and son on opposite sides of the American Civil War, and the father kills the son. Very morbid. I was all of Hindi 10 and a half. But it was published. Henry's Last Battle, that was my first story, in the Free Press, in the Bharat Jyoti. And then the big old stuff. But what happens when you see yourself on print is you begin to believe in yourself as a writer. True. And the interesting thing about writing for Indian magazines in those days, first of all, because there wasn't any TV or anything, people actually read magazines to divert themselves. But secondly, you could meet the people who were reading you. Yeah. So these kind of audience feedback, the relationship between writer and audience, which is so important to really appreciate, whether you're driving home your point, whether you're reaching people and so on, that came to me from the very start because of the medium as well. And I must say, right through my teenage years, I've come back from school, finish my homework, and write. There are articles, short stories. I once boasted, and I don't think I was inaccurate, that before the emergency, I had published something or the other in every single English language publication in India, including Eve's Weekly and Chandamama. So I was absurdly prolific. And I had fun doing it, and I made mistakes, and I was rude. And I remember reviewing a book I didn't like and saying that if you must read this book, borrow it to deprive the poor author of his might. I mean, you learn sometimes by doing things wrongly and doing things cruelly and so on, but because the power of the pen is something that you have to get used to and before you exercise it responsibly. So I wrote right through school. When I went to graduate school, it was a little tougher, but I wrote a little bit. And when I went into the United Nations, I providentially made sure that I would get permission to write and publish, because I went and argued that some people's hobbies are collecting butterflies or playing football on the weekend. My hobby is writing. So I need to have that permission. And the lady who was in charge of personnel at the UN High Commissioner for Refugees very kindly said, all right, provided you don't do anything to violate the staff rules. So I signed a formal undertaking. I was officially given permission. And I would often joke, just as James Bond has a license to kill, I have a license to write. And so I published throughout my UN years as well.
And
in many
very
ways,
successful and well-reviewed novels during that period. Right?
Indeed, indeed. In fact, the Great Indian Novel was written in Geneva when I'd come back from my second stint there after working for the Vietnamese boat people and other refugees in Southeast Asia and Singapore. And then when I came to Geneva, I ended up having a chance to actually have slightly more predictable working hours, and I wrote evenings, nights, weekends, whenever I could. And the Great Indian Novel was a result. And that that was not just my first book, but it's a book into which you pour everything. Your first book always, First of all, you don't know if you can do it. Secondly, you don't know if you do succeed in doing it, somebody publishes it, whether anyone will read it. And then you don't know whether, if it's published and read, whether you will be able to do it again. So you really put everything of yourself in. And this was my great sort of outpouring of feelings about India, about the nationalist movement, about the epics, about Mahabharata, about the country, its values, its future, everything. So, I mean, I was 30 years old when I began writing it. In fact, the epiphany of turning 30 without any discernible achievement is what led me to want to start writing this novel. And I'm very, very gratified today to see kids who weren't born when that book was written and published coming up to me to get copies signed. For me, that's immensely gratifying. Thank you.
If you read the stuff in the book, I mean, yes, of course, you were a writer, but many of the things we associate with Shashi Tharoor now, you were at quite a young age. You were always an internationalist. You worked very successfully for the UN. You were an international diplomat of great reputation. You were always a liberal. You always had liberal views. The views we now sometimes say are Congress versus BJP. You had those views long before there was a BJP of any, before there was a BJP and before you even knew about the Congress.
That's right. And I hadn't joined the Congress. I mean, I had these views well before I joined. I hadn't joined the Congress till I eventually returned to India in 2009. I will say, though, that these views came to me from growing up in India, as well as the international experience Vir talks about, because a lot of what, I think, one begins really to think in one's teens about the country you're living in, the situation you see around you, and you start observing, start reading. I was blessed with a father who used to get every newspaper published in the cities we were living in, and then bring the rest of the country's papers in the evening. And those days, newspapers were very slim. They were 8, 10, 12 pages. So I would read sort of 4 newspapers of the morning chai, another 6 newspapers with the evening chai, and I would essentially be incredibly immersed in all that was going on, and I formulated my views early on. And they were, as you rightly say, liberal views. I'm always a bit confused when the right wing in this country speaks of left liberal, because I'm not a leftist, but I am a liberal.
I'm glad you said that. Can you make that distinction clear for an audience, why this term left liberal is meaningless?
Yeah, I mean, leftism, as I understand it anyway, is a specific kind of political ideology, largely derived from Marx's understanding of the forces of production and capital and the invidious role that one plays in the other. And ultimately, it carries with it a whole set of policy preferences, including more nationalization, more control by the state, less freedom for private enterprise, and a generally more intrusive government. Yeah. Whereas a liberal is somebody who basically wants people to be free to pursue their own dreams as much as possible. Liberals tend to be non-judgmental. They tend to say, yes, of course, businessmen should be allowed to flourish and make their money, but equally they have to pay taxes to the state, and equally the state will have a responsibility to help those who are left out. The party that actually articulated those views best in my childhood was the Swatantra Party.
Which you supported in your
childhood. Which I supported. Rajaji was the founder, Minu Masani and others, Pilu Modi. Yeah. But then they collapsed, unfortunately, and merged into Charan Singh's BKD and became the BLD and essentially disappeared from the face of the earth. But the values of the Swatantra Party were precisely all of these things. They were pro-free enterprise. They were very much, at the same time, respectful of social justice. And one of the marvelous things about it, there are a list of, I've forgotten now, 16 or something principles that were the core beliefs and tenets of the party. And the 16th one was, anything that is not covered in the above, you're free to believe what you like, which is exactly my attitude. I tend to be somebody who, when I meet people, I don't judge them. I don't, I not only want for myself the freedom to be who I am and to find my own happiness. I want you to have your freedom to be what you are. And as long as you're not hurting somebody else, your way of pursuing your happiness, your beliefs are entirely up to you. So I'm a vegetarian in a non-vegetarian family, but it's never occurred to me to try and insist to somebody else what they can and cannot eat, just as I don't want them to tell me what to eat. I mean, these are sort of, to my mind, the classic liberal ways of living and being. And to my mind, these principles were frankly really fully embraced by the Congress only after 91 when liberalization came. But after that, it seemed to me the vehicle that most appropriately took these views forward. But having said that, let me just say very clearly that political philosophy is a different issue. Practical politics is something very, very striking. I will admit, for example, that my understanding of the need for welfare in India came from actually being somebody seeking votes from people, representing them, receiving their concerns and petitions and problems, and realizing how much so many people in our country still need the state, still need agents of the state to be effective, to be able to deliver fundamental goods and services to the poor of our country. And, if you come into purely the theory of liberalism, you might say the state has no business doing A, B, and C, but in the Indian context, it still does. So that sort of thing. You do have to
but
temper.
that's okay, because the Congress introduced Narega and all of these welfare measures.
That's why I would support Narega, whereas a classical liberal might not.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't sort of described you as a secularist, because that seems to me to be sort of bogus Indian distinction. If you're a liberal, how can you not be secular?
That's right. Except that even secular, strictly speaking, if you look up the dictionary, refers to an absence of religion, a distancing from religion. Whereas what our sort of system actually encouraged was a proliferation of religions, was that all religions may flourish and all may or may not benefit from the support and patronage of the state. But of course, no religion should be a disability to you in your advancement in this country, nor should it be an advantage to you in your advancement in this country. And that, to my mind, was acceptable. So I thought that pluralism and even the celebration of diversity were more appropriate terms than secularism. And I said so for the first time in print more than a quarter of a century ago, but it didn't catch on. So we still sometimes find ourselves saying secular to be understood what we're talking about. But I'm not irreligious, and I think the vast majority of Indians are not irreligious.
I said, I think you probably read this about 3 weeks ago, that the best definition of the idea of India, which incorporated many of these elements, was given by you. So tell us, what is the idea of India and what does it mean to you?
Well, look, I think I'm very sensitive to the charge that there are some of us who arrogate to ourselves the authority to decide what the idea of India is. And I say, no, that's not the case. I am reflecting the idea of India enshrined in the Constitution.
Right.
And that is what was arrived at over 2.5 years of debate by the great and good of our land from all over the country, people trained in law, people who represented the public. And if they said that India is a country where it shouldn't matter what your color of skin is, what language you speak, which part of the country you come from, what religion you practice, what caste you belong to, as long as you are an Indian, you will have all the rights that every other Indian has. To my mind, that idea of India is sanctified by the Constitution, and it's my idea of India. And it is also for me, the idea of an ancient land with an ancient civilization, which has been united by a common geography and at the same time burnished by a shared history that has not always been easy or pleasant. And at the end of it, we are all in this together and we've all contributed. Jawaharlal Nehru famously spoke of India as a palimpsest. That is, you write something on the wall and then she comes and writes on top of that. And he comes and writes on top of that. But no layer erases what has been written before. So the result is a palimpsest. And that palimpsest is India, where everyone has contributed in their own way to what we are today. I have spoken of India as a thali, that, the Americans keep talking about their melting pot. And I say, you might be a melting pot, we're not. We're a thali, because we're a collection of different dishes and different bowls. They each taste different and they don't necessarily flow into each other because they are in different bowls. But they belong together on that platter and they combine on your palate to give you a satisfying repast. That is the India that I cherish and cling on to, and that I hoped to pass on to the next generation. But I'm sorry to say, Vir, that that thali is being replaced by an increasingly saffron khichdi.
So, that was my next question. Is the idea of India going to survive this crowd?
It worries me. And I'll say this very frankly to all of you, because I've been having conversations here in Jaipur in the last couple of days, and certainly in the last couple of years elsewhere around the country, that have left me disturbed and troubled at a very simple, elemental, non-political philosophy sort of way. When a woman who's come to us from a foreign country, her name is Noor, I hope she'll forgive me for using a private conversation, and she works in India for the last 15 years, works with karigars and so on. And she says, it used to be in India when I told people my name is Noor, they say, oh, we have a name like this in India too, and it means light and all of this, what a lovely name and so on. She says, today when I say my name is Noor, the first question I get back is, oh, you're Muslim. This whole mentality, the toxin that has been injected into the thinking of people is something that I find absolutely revolting, but equally troubling because it's so widespread. When an eminent figure like Khalid Ansari, the founder editor of Midday and Sports Week and so on, publishes his autobiography, which I launched in Mumbai a couple of weeks ago, and he writes about how people he thought of as lifelong friends and never judged by their religion have now come out openly saying things about Muslims and Islam and how different they are and so on. He wonders, has he got everything wrong about this country that he loves and cherishes and grew up in? And his father was a freedom fighter for, by the way. So all of these things, I think that when we start making some of us, an India that is denied to some of us will one day be denied to all of us. If we allow this poison to infect our thinking and our consciousness, it seems to me that we will end up with an India that is not the India certainly that I grew up in. I grew up in Bombay in the 60s with parents from the nationalist generation. My father dropped his caste name in college at the time of just before independence. When I look back, I realized the friends who came home to play for my class were of every conceivable description. We had Sikhs and Christians and Muslims and Hindus and the whole lot. And it never occurred to my parents to remark upon that fact, nor was I ever made conscious of it. I mean, if my friend Mamu was in a minority, it was the minority of the very rich. It never occurred to me there was some other minority because Mamu was actually short for Muhammad. The fact is that these were things that you didn't think about because that wasn't what you're supposed to do. It was an officially sanctified encouragement of ignoring religious differences. Some of you here may be old enough to know about the days when entertainment tax used to be levied on movie theater tickets. And the entertainment tax was waived for movies that specifically preach the right kind of message. So if Amar Akbar Antony comes out with 3 children separated as toddlers, who are then brought up, one by a Hindu, one by a Muslim, one by a Christian, and of course reunite at the end and bash up the villains, that gets an entertainment tax exemption because the storyline and the assumptions of it are teaching a message of national integration. Now it's national disintegration that is being preached by the authorities.
So here's my question, and I ask you this because you've written about the early history of the Indian Republic. There was always a sort of saffronized Hindu streak in Indian politics. It played no large part in our freedom struggle as much as they may want to rewrite it now. How do you think it's suddenly come to the fore and has begun to replace and displace the ideology enshrined in our constitution?
It's difficult to understand, and we're living through the moment. And we're seeing election after election going to people who are open about their communal bigotry, their religious bias, very, very open about it. It used to be dog whistling at one point, right? Subtle ways of pointing to someone's religion or faith. Now it's open, and yet people are voting for them. So some would argue they're not voting for them because of their bigotry. They're voting for them despite their bigotry because they've built toilets and given gas cylinders to women in villages and so on and so forth. That's one kind of argument. Others will say it's because of both. And the third will say that if you like the gas cylinders and the toilets and you want them coming, then you've got to buy into the bigotry too, so your mindset changes. Whatever it may be, it's certainly not healthy in the long term for our country. I mean, recall, it wasn't that long ago. I was working for the UN in 2004 when the election results came out. I was traveling in the Arab Gulf that time. And I was just astonished by the admiration and, frankly, awe with which senior ministers and officials in the Arab Gulf countries would greet the fact that here you had an Indian election that had been won by a political party led by a woman of Italian descent and Catholic faith, who then made way for a Sikh to be sworn in as prime minister by a Muslim president in a country 80% Hindu. Yeah. I mean, they were just totally thrown by this. And I would tell them with pride, this wasn't done to impress anybody. This is simply India being itself. Yeah. Can we imagine this again? Is this the India that we can look forward to in the future? Or are we going to see something very different from those who have been repeatedly winning elections in our country? It's a worrying question. And when you say how and why, I don't really know. One can all sort of anatomize. In my last book, The Battle of Belonging, I did try to anatomize 8-9 factors, and some of you may agree with them, some of you may not. There may be other things that come in. But the truth is that it seems to be happening around us, and we are it, right? We are the ones who are either participants and therefore complicit in this transformation, or we are the ones who have to resist it and try and wrest back the idea of an India which belongs to everyone, and where we can proudly say, hardly any Indian Muslim ever joined Al-Qaeda or ISIS or the Taliban because they didn't need to. They have a stake in this society. How long will we be able to keep saying that if Muslims are going to feel more and more alienated time after time? Yeah. And it's the Muslims today, it'll be the Christians tomorrow. People bursting into Christian churches and vandalizing them during Christmas last December. Where is this going to end? Yeah. I really, really worry. And again, coming from the South, where this is not the way we think, and we don't function this way, we're looking with increasing horror at what's going on in the North. And many people in the South are going to ask themselves whether they want to be part of this. And there's a horrifying thought that this wonderful Indian unity we've celebrated and loved for so long, will these issues tear us asunder communally, regionally, and elsewhere? It's a very, very sad situation. And I don't even think that the cynical opportunists who are using these issues to advance their politics are even conscious of the very grave danger that they are putting the country in.
Do you think they have a long-term vision, that they care that they're destroying a great democratic, liberal country? They just want to win elections tomorrow.
That's right. They just want to win elections tomorrow, and they haven't thought about the day after tomorrow. They haven't thought about the fact that, in fact, the country that they're ruling today may not exist in this form tomorrow if they carry on like this indefinitely.
Which is now a real danger. I mean, let's be honest. That it may not exist in this form in the coming days.
Well, there are other problems. There's the 26th Amendment to the Constitution, which expires in 2026. It wasn't 26, whatever the number was, 41st Amendment. It was an amendment anyway. I think it was the 41st Amendment that freezes Lok Sabha representation at the population levels of 1971. You may say that's pretty bizarre, but the reason was indeed for national unity's sake, not to reward those states that had failed to empower their women and control their population and so on, and also not to punish those states which had indeed done those things and as a result were proportionately dwindling in numbers. So today, we have a slightly odd situation that clearly there are far more people in some of the northern Hindi belt states than their representation in the Lok Sabha would suggest. Now, when the amendment expires, the BJP has made no secret of its intention that they will revise this and add more seats in the Hindi belt. One of the results of that is going to be the complete disenfranchisement of the South. Right. And already southern politicians are muttering about what this means for them. Today, you cannot amend the Constitution of India without having some southern states go along with you. Tomorrow, you'll be able to do everything with just the 2/3 of the population and the seats in the Hindi belt. Where does that leave everyone else? Yeah. Will we have to think about new constitutional arrangements to ensure that others are also consulted before major changes are made? And if not, what happens? How will people react? I wonder if anyone is asking themselves these questions, or are they only interested in short-term thinking?
But there is this assumption that you can say oppress minorities and the minorities will sit and take it. You can impose the will of the North on the South and the South will sit and take it. At some stage, the worm will turn. No?
Let's wait and see, and let's hope not for the country's sake. All of us want to see India united, prosperous, and flourishing. But at the same time, it requires a certain imagination and a certain commitment to keep India united and flourishing, which is not about uniformity and conformity, but rather about unity and consensus and bringing people along. That difference is simply not fully appreciated, I'm afraid.
The general bigoted view of people like you is that you're A, well-educated, B, you speak very good English, and C, you're not at all religious, which is why you don't understand their point of view. I mean, guilty on one, guilty on two, but wrong on three, because you are religious.
Yeah, I mean, I've written a couple of books on Hinduism, which are available here for those of you interested, because I actually consider the Hindutva movement to be profoundly anti-Hindu.
Yeah.
I think Hinduism is an extraordinary faith for all sorts of reasons that I've explained in the book. But one of the principal issues here is, as Swami Vivekananda famously preached in his World Parliament of Religions address in Chicago in 1893, he said, I'm proud to speak to you on behalf of a religion that has taught the world not just tolerance, but acceptance. And I read that as a teenager and I churned it over in my head for years afterwards. What a profound thought it is. Because, we all learn in history textbooks that tolerance is a good thing. A tolerant king is a good guy because he lets people practice their faith and so on. But when you really think about it, tolerance is a rather patronizing idea.
Yeah.
Because the tolerant king is saying, essentially, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will magnanimously indulge you in your right to be wrong. That's what tolerance is. Whereas acceptance, which is what Vivekananda talks about, says, I believe I have the truth, you believe you have the truth, I respect your truth, please respect my truth. And to my mind, that is the perfect prescription for getting along in a multi-religious society in our country. Now, this Hinduism has great sanctity in the scriptures. Vivekananda would love to quote the Shiva Mahimna Stotram, which says that just as many rivers, some flow, some straight, some crooked, in different directions and end up in the same sea, so also all ways of worship end up in the same divine. And this kind of idea is a very Hindu idea. Ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti. There's one truth, but different sages call it by different names. He used to end his speeches by saying, in the name of and then he would mention the gods of what dozen religions, saying they're all the same. So in the name of all these gods, I conclude my remarks. That was the Hinduism he taught us. This Hinduism has been reduced by the Hindutva acolytes into something like the team identity of the British football hooligan. This is my team. If you don't support my team, I'm going to bash you on the head with my placard. That's not Hinduism. It's a betrayal of the essence of what Hinduism stands for.
I'm trying to avoid political questions, but I'm going to have to ask you this. One of the criticisms of your party is that because you downplayed the importance of Hinduism in our society, the BJP was able to claim it for themselves and you people allowed them to do it. Is that fair?
It's a fair charge only because those of us in the Congress party and other secular parties, to use that word, who practiced their own faiths, whether Hinduism or any other faith, did so privately. No one used to make a show of it because making a show of it was considered both unnecessary and unseemly. The BJP capitalized on that to basically posit themselves as good Hindus versus godless secularists. Yeah. And in that kind of framing of the issue, obviously the godless secularists lose every time because a lot of people in this country consider themselves good Hindus. My point is, good Hindus don't go about destroying other people's places of worship. Good Hindus don't go about flogging some poor chap and telling him to say Jai Shri Ram and he doesn't believe it. Good Hindus don't do this kind of. This is not good Hinduism. This is a kind of vicious politics of identity. And in my constituency in Kerala, which is a very accommodative and liberal place, it is entirely customary for me as a politician, for every other politician, to go to the places of worship of every of our constituent religions. I have not only temples and not only temples and churches in my constituency. I'm sorry, temples and mosques in my constituency. I have 7 or 8 different denominations of Christians.
Yep.
And I pop by all of them. There was one Christmas Eve when I managed to visit 7 different churches of 7 different sects. And the point is that that's fine because it's a way of showing respect to the people. It doesn't mean, quote unquote, that you're pandering, as the BJP would have it. It means that you are participating in the joys of celebration of your voters and your constituents. And that kind of politics of religion is harmless. A politics of religion that says that, people of our faith deserve better breaks than people of another faith, or that if they get something, we must get more of the same. And that kind of language, that to my mind is very dangerous.
Okay. I want to talk about one other aspect. I think that was present in your work from an early age and has taken up much of your life working for the UN, is that you've always been an internationalist. Is that fair?
Very much so. From my childhood, I was fascinated by the way in which the world was arranged and not so well arranged. And I used to, in those days, Indian newspapers had very little space for foreign news. Half a page was about it. So I would read a lot of half pages and try and find out as much as I could. And the truth is that the world cannot be ignored. I mean, it's not a cliche. Nehru said it in his Tryst with Destiny speech in 47, that we're all far too closely knit together for any country to think it can live apart. And it was true in 47, it's even truer today. And therefore, for us to be indifferent to the world is impossible. We need to know what's going on in the world, how it affects us. And so I was, yes, very much an internationalist for a very long time. And as it happens, I joined the UN at 22.
Right. Which leads me to today. Do you think we are wrong to say we have to back Russia? There are arms suppliers. Let whatever is going to happen to Ukraine happen to Ukraine.
I've said this when we did it. I was, I think, the first to say it, and I said it on the day of our explanation of vote, that it was unworthy of us. Yeah. I think that we have to understand that there are some principles India has stood for throughout its existence as an independent sovereign nation that are in our interest as well as the interests of every other country in the world. And those include sovereignty of states, the inviolability of borders, and the inadmissibility of resorting to force to settle your geopolitical disputes or your differences with your neighbors. These are things we've said repeatedly on various occasions. Why could we not bring ourselves to say it when Russia did it? Why is it that we came across as mealy-mouthed in our first explanation of vote when we wouldn't mention the name Russia, didn't use the word invasion, and forgot to reiterate these principles? Subsequent speeches we have done so, and I hope that my making a fuss about it has contributed, because I know it was noticed by some. Yeah. The truth of the matter is that we as a country have some self-respect also, right? Do we want others turning around and sitting on their hands if China violates these principles and marches across our borders? I think we should have stood up for this. And yes, we could have told the Russians, we will abstain rather than vote against you, but we're going to explain very clearly that we don't agree with these aspects of what you've done, but we'll abstain because we understand your security concerns or whatever. Some such formula could have been found. I think it was the combination of the abstention and the explanation of vote that really disappointed me.
Okay. We've got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the essential Shashi Tharoor, the man. You're successful in many, many ways. You're a successful writer. You've had a successful career as an international diplomat. You've worked in the private sector briefly. The private sector would snap you up. And yet you stay here working for the Congress party as it loses election after election, facing... sorry about that. You're not allowed to smile at that, but facing every kind of, the kind of things that have been said about you, the kind of personal calumny, the kind of unfounded, bizarre allegations that have been hurled at you. Do you ever say to yourself, I don't need this?
Oh, many times.
Yeah?
Many times. But, having taken it on, it's curious. It was a huge leap, right? To transform yourself from a UN civil servant. And briefly, I sort of did a year and a bit of a business consultancy. But then to transform myself from that kind of life to one where I was putting on a munda, South Indian dhoti, and going on the hottest days of the year to the hottest parts of my constituency to look for votes, speaking in a language I would normally use very, very rarely in my international life, speaking in a dozen or 17 or 20 or 30 times a day in speeches, essentially then responding to a whole set of concerns, which in many ways were new to me, and trying to find solutions to them through the government system in Delhi. All of this was an enormous transformation for me. And I'm proud to say that by and large, I pulled it off.
You won 3 Lok Sabha elections.
And in fact, I won that first re-election because of the work I had done for the constituency and the actual way I had solved these problems. Because otherwise, everything was against me. It was the Modi wave. Every single college student had been caught up in the Modi wave and was going to vote there. My wife had passed away 2 months before the voting, and both the BJP and the communists, my two principal rivals, were going door to door saying, how can you vote for this man? He murdered his wife. Preposterous, unthinkable, but they were doing it. It was part of their campaign. And so if it weren't for the fact that these people said, no, we know this guy. He's actually worked for us for 5 years. We know he wouldn't do any of this nonsense. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be back in Parliament. And who knows, I would have not have remained in politics. But it's because of the gratitude I feel to my voters for having kept their faith in me that I too feel I have to keep my faith in them. And that therefore that implies that I stay on and fight, however lonely the fight may be, for the values and principles that I hold dear, which I've never hidden from them, which I've been very open about, even if it's some of the sort of constituent servicing, local development projects and so on that got me my votes. They also agree with what I believe and what I stand for. And I'm not going to let that down by, for example, going to the opposite party, as some of my colleagues, I think, have immorally done or amorally done. Because, you can't, with great earnestness and sincerity, attack the policies of a particular party for years and suddenly turn on a dime and join them the next day. That, to my mind, is impossible to conceive of. So I'll keep struggling on, but it's not been easy.
I wanted to ask you about that because when one of your colleagues did join the BJP, you made the point that politics is not a job. You join a political party because you believe in certain ideals and in certain values. If that party does badly and somebody else who's doing better offers you a post, you don't just take it. It's not like being general manager of State Bank and being offered a managing director of Union Bank. So can you explain that a little?
Exactly. You said it absolutely. That's exactly what I wrote. And I also said that politics is not a career, it's a cause. And that you must go into politics with a sense of mission. I mean, what is politics all about, right? You're supposed to be advocating your vision of a better society for your country, and you're trying to persuade people to vote for you so you get a chance to implement that vision. That's what politics should be about. But is it really about that for many of these politicians today? Very sadly, I don't think so. I think there are certainly some, even the misguided ones, who are in politics with that kind of cause or that kind of mission, that kind of passion. But there are many who are simply there thinking that they'll get a good position or a good job or make money on the side or whatever it may be. And those motives, I hope that as the electorate gets more educated and more aware, that the voters will see through this and reject politicians of that nature.
There are many young people in this audience who are watching this political drama with degrees of, well, at the very least, bafflement, if not disgust. What is your advice to young people who want to join politics?
Well, first of all, I hope there are young people who want to join politics, because politics needs young people with energy, ideals, enthusiasm. I remember once meeting a bunch of school-leaving kids who very cheerfully said, we're not interested in politics. And I said, well, let me give you bad news. Politics is interested in you, because the decisions that politicians take are going to affect your lives, will affect what choices are available to you when you go to college, or how many colleges are available to you. It'll affect what jobs are available to you when you graduate. So don't sit back and say you're not interested in politics. You better be. You better know what kind of politics you need to care about, what kind of India you want to see that's better for you. And then work for it. Now, not everybody is going to be a politician. I certainly hope that. And many of them should go on and be good, radiologists and disc jockeys and accountants and all the things that our society needs, in addition to the doctors and engineers that everyone's parents want them to be. But the truth is that beyond that, some people are needed who have the talent, the ability, who can connect with people and at the same time are able to develop a vision of what they'd like to see that's better in this country. And I hope that there are people like you in the audience today who are going to go out and say, yeah, I'm going to give politics a try because I don't like what's happening in my country. Or for the opposite, that this is what I want to see happening and you want to support those who are doing it. You have the right to do that. That's my liberalism coming out.
There are so many people here, Shashi, listening to you with hope. They listen to you, of course, because they admire you, but they listen to you also because you represent an ideal version of what a politician should be like. When they listen to you, they feel optimistic about the future. what can they do to hold on to that optimism with everything that's happening to India today?
Well, I mean, the thing that I always used to tell my kids was never give up. Because, the fact is that whether you're a human being or you're an institution, a party, you're bound to have setbacks. I mean, I certainly have had numerous disappointments, failures in my life. And I'd like to think that I've tried to learn from each of those failures and to try and do better next time. And, it's a cliche. Every one of you has been to a graduation speech, has heard this kind of wisdom being flung your way, but it's actually true. And the reason so many people say this is it accords with their own experience. Certainly in my case, it really has, because I've been through some very, very tough times where the temptation to just throw in the towel and say the hell with it is inevitable. We're human, we have weaknesses. And you say, why do I want to continue this fight? Who am I doing it for? But ultimately, if you have that self-belief that you're here for a purpose and that purpose has not been fulfilled, you're going to keep on trying for as long as you possibly can. I think that's it. I mean, that ultimately is what I would say to all of you. Be the best that you can be. Don't let yourself down, and then you won't let the country down.
We have about a minute left. None of us ever gets to write our own epitaphs. None of us gets to decide how history will remember us. But if you had a choice, how would you like to be remembered?
I don't know. He tried, perhaps. As long as somebody doesn't change that, he was trying.
But he tried. He fought the good fight. He tried. He never gave up. That sort of thing.
I hope you'll be the one writing it. Ask some great questions. There seem to be some hands in the audience, Vir. Oh, plenty. My gosh.
All right. Yeah. Great. Shashi Tharoor, thank you so much. I think you can tell from the audience and you can tell from how rapt this session is. I would love to take questions, but they're refusing to let me take questions.
Oh, they're not letting you take questions?
Yeah. So
sorry.
I would love to.
The next session needs a stage.
You can grab him on the outside. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll be signing books.
He's there. You can buy a book and he'll answer your questions.